So today I am going to start my test on this pattern that I wrote called Harmony Banner. And it was designed for Timeless Treasure originally and will be published for them with this fabric collection that I have here. And it's based off of a 24 by 44 inch banner. However, we don't always get, as pattern designers, we don't always get the actual fabrics. So we have to use other things to test. And I happen to have this piece here. However, and I love this silhouette. And I bought this at a sale back in the summer, knowing that I had this pattern coming out. And but it doesn't run the right direction. So you'll see here in the pattern that this banner is running up and down this way, while this piece of fabric, which is a banner piece, is running side to side. So I'm going to make it work because I'm actually going to cut it uh, down the center, and then I'm going to piece the pieces together so that we can get the yardage. I've worked out the math ahead of time, and so I think it's going to work, but it's going to be a little bit fiddly. But I really like this a lot. And then I had this other silhouette here. I bought this years ago and I just loved it. It has these deer heads in it and birds, and I just love this. And I thought, well, this will go really great with it. I've never used it. I've had it for years and years and years. And then some of the fabric. So this deer head is going to be this little print here. And then I have some black yardage for the black. And then I'm going to accent it with this red and use that where the yellow is. And I think it's going to turn out really smart. So I'm going to get to figuring out what I'm going to do with this panel, and um, and then we'll cut out the fabrics. So I've done some measuring, and let me flip this around so it's right side for you. And so what I've determined that the spaces in between these panels here is 2.5 inches. So I'm going to cut um, the length, no, to be the width of fabric at 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches, which will put me in the center of this run right here. And so I'm going to cut these apart, and then I'm going to stitch them back together, and I will still have the length that I need, which is 42 inches by 22 inches for the panel to be inserted into that pattern. So that's what I'm going to do now. And because this is printed, and they don't always print straight, I am going to do it one layer at a time. I'm not going to do 2 layers. I'm lining up the ruler at 1.25 inches. Now, for the final pattern, obviously you're not going to need to do that if you're actually using the panel that um, I designed it for, or if you have another panel in mind, which it is designed to be used with other panels. Um, it doesn't need to necessarily be from that collection, which is called Fruitopia. Fruitopia, and it's based on the cats that are in it. Looks like maybe I could use a fresh blade in my rotary cutter. I just think these silhouettes are so charming. This panel is by Robert Kaufman, and I have no idea how old the collection is from this. I bought this at a quilt rummage sale kind of thing held by one of the little guilds in the area, and it was in their panel section. And I do work with a lot of panels, so um, I knew that I would get some use out of it. So now I can cut this strip in half. I'll, although it's a shame to lose this because this is really cute. But so we'll do three, and they'll be stacked three on top of each other. Let's do this side here. I hope everyone is having a wonderful new year. I hadn't planned to, do some content around new beginnings and all that stuff, and I haven't gotten to it. And I actually want to do a recap of all the quilts that I did in 2025. I don't have everything recorded. There were a few that I did in there that I didn't record. They were special requests from friends to do, um, and with tight timelines, so I didn't film it. And I always regret that I didn't film it because I like, oh, I know they would love it, but I just don't have time right now. And even this last week, I took on a project that I didn't need to do, but you know how you want to just help out a friend. And so another quilt pattern writer that I had met a couple years ago put out a request that she needed some help with getting some of her sample quilts quilted, and she had injured her hand. And so she moved into the area, and I thought, well, I can help her. And so I have 1 inch here, so I'm going to cut it at a 1/2 inch. And back to the story. Um, and so I ended up quilting 2 quilts this week when I got off work, and it was a busy week at work. I'd taken some time off during the holiday, and that stacks up my day job. And so I had to get my clients taken care of, and so I had to work a long week for me. Normally, I like to work a 4-day work week, but it ended up being a 5-day work week. And so now we'll get back into our normal rhythm of things where we'll have a few weeks where I don't work on a Saturday. So that'll be nice and I can get caught up. It's hard to believe that we're this far into the new year already. Okay, so those are all cut. Now we need to cut the sides down. Let's see, cut these sides down here. So each one of these sides here need to be cut down to a 1/2 inch as well. Although, let's measure this because I'm wanting it to be, I think my pattern calls for it being 22.5 inches. Yeah, 22.5 inches. And here we are. So, can you see this? I see that there's some glare from the lights. So I basically have 22.25. I thought it was going to be okay. So, what to do? What to do? I could, um, but what if I were to go ahead and cut this down to 1/2 inch on the sides? And I could always make my inner border a little bit bigger to compensate. Maybe that's what I'll do for this test. Is this inner border right here would normally be, I think it's like 2 inches wide. Yeah, 2 inches wide. So I would need to add I'd have to make it 4 inches wide. That's a lot. Maybe we do a double board where maybe we add a little bit of black in and make it more framed. We could do that. Because the most important thing is that we get this up to 22.5 inches wide. Because I feel like I have the 44 for sure. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this side down on each one of those strips to a 1/2 inch on each side, and then we'll frame it out in black and then we'll be able to add the other. And then we get to keep this little strip here of motifs. That might be fun to throw in another project somewhere. So my little Bodhi, my little Chihuahua, he has taken himself off to my office where he has a bed in there and toys and stuff. But he has started playing this game with me where he there's a couple little steps down into the loft, and he goes down those steps, but for some reason he has decided that he cannot come back up them. There's 2 steps, that's it. And he's I'm not hearing him now, so he's probably put himself to bed, but he's been in there whining and crying at me to go get him. So I go to get him, but he won't come to me. He wants to play the get me game. So I tried playing how about you get me? And he's like, "No, I don't want to play get you game. I want you to just fiddle around trying to catch me." And so I decided I'm not playing your game. So So each one of these strips is measuring, let's see here, 8 inches. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to sew all of these strips together, and then we'll add on that black border so that we can get ourselves up to our 22.5 by 44 inch round for the inner panel. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll get this all pressed out and come back and we'll see what we have. So I have my panel all sized up, and so we had to refashion it a little bit to get it up to size, but it's up to size now. Just added this black border on and we were good to go. So I've got it up to 22.5 by 42.5. So this is all ready to go. And then I've gone ahead and cut out the remaining fabrics. And I'm going to strip piece this black and the silhouette print here for our checkerboard. And I've gone ahead and this is the added border that is yellow in the pattern. Where's my page? Oh, here it is. So in the pattern, it is yellow, but we're going to be using red to frame out the panel, and then the red where the yellow is down in this block. So I've gone ahead and done all of the cutting for that, and these are the remaining pieces for the tabs and for the block, and this black will go with the red for the half square triangles. So I'm going to do some strip piecing and we'll start creating our checkerboard border. So now we'll do our block construction. This is the first step of this pattern, and I've gone ahead and um, drawn a diagonal line from corner to corner and stitched 1/4 of an inch from the diagonal line on both sides. And now we'll cut the half square triangle, lining up the points. This is a 2 at a time method. And now we'll want to square up our triangles. And we want these triangles here to be 3.5 inches. So what I like to do is I do not press these open before I trim them. And the reason why is then I have to trim 4 sides. And this way I only have to trim 2. So what I do is with this half square, um, they call it a triangle square up plus, is I put the 3.5 inch mark on my stitch line, not on the cut line, but on the stitch line. And I make sure that the 3.5 mark is lining up on the stitch line on this raw edge here, and adjust slightly so it's on the stitch line on the left side as well. And by doing this, we've squared up our triangle. Now we still do have to cut off our dog ears, and that ruler does have little slots. I'll show you here. Has little slots there. Um, I think they're a bit fiddly, so I just have the raw edge at a 45-degree angle in my hand, and I just nip off the edge. I find this is a lot easier, and especially if you're doing tons of them. Obviously we only have 4, so it's not that big of a deal. But so again, you want to line up your marks on the stitch line at 3.5 inches. And trim. Now I'll press these out to the dark side. So I have all the triangles done. Let's double check that we have 3.5 inches. And we have 3.5 inches. So now we will place these in the corners. So the black is on top or pointed towards our center. And I went ahead and I fussy cut it out so that there was a bird in the center. I thought that would make a nice accent. And so there is our block. And so we'll just sew these into rows. And then once the rows are sewn, then we will sew the rows together. So the block is complete. I think that the bird just looks fantastic in the center. I'm really glad that I did that. So we'll set this off to the side. So we have all of our strips sewn together, and I've gone ahead and pressed them. And I want to show you how I like to do my strip piecing. So I have pressed to the dark side, and because we're going to be doing 4 patches, if you nest these seams together when you cut, they'll all be ready to go when you go to sew them. So you don't have to really line them up, and you can feel that they're nested. And let me check what I have written here. You need 94 of these. So I like to line up on the seam line and then see where I'm hitting, make sure that these outside lines are straight and we don't have anything going angled. And you may need to straighten up one edge as we go because sometimes they can start veering off. So there is our first 4 patch, and it's all nice and nested together. And I will put them in stacks of 10 as I do them just to keep myself organized. As you move down the strip and press the seam there so that you can feel that it is still nested, and adjust when you need to, just to keep accuracy. So our first step in constructing our borders is to do 6 2 patches. These are 2 patches, and we're going to do end to end with them like so. We'll do 6 of these. And then on the last one, we will attach one black square. And this will be one of the border strips for our panel. So now that we have all of our 4 patches created, we're going to create 5 border strips, and they will have 6 of these 4 patches sewn end to end. And then we will end with 1 2 patch. And we'll press those out. I'm going to set these aside. I have completed my strips here, and we'll set these aside for now and move on to create corner. So now that we have those strips completed, we're going to create this little 3 patch here. So we'll attach a square to the upper left hand corner of a 2 patch and to the upper right hand corner of a 2 patch. Now for the 2 patch on the right side, we're actually going to make 2 like so. So I have it all laid out here with our panel and our red outer border and the checkerboard borders. You can see how these are going to line up nicely with the orientation of the black against the print on both the left and the right side. And the camera is picking up this lower half down here. And I just think this looks terrific. So we'll get the borders on, and then we'll start working with this lower section here. We'll be doing the whole center run and then attaching these side borders will be our last attachment. And I have to say, I'm excited to put this together. I don't know if you noticed how bundled up I am. It is just a cold, clear, crisp, beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a bit chilly in my sewing room. And I just keep adding more and more layers. So I'm a little bundled up. So I'm gonna get to sewing and I'll show you a progress shot when I get some done. So the Harmony banner is all done, and I just love how this turned out. I'm panning down, and I love that block down at the bottom with the bird in it. And I'm really excited to show you how I'm going to quilt this. I have this beautiful design that I got from one of my quilt friends. Um, and her handle is Pear Paws Designs, I believe. I'll put the link in the comments below, and it has birds in it. And you'll notice that there's a lot of birds in the panel itself. And so I thought it would be really great. And I'm thinking that I'm going to quilt it in maybe an off-white because the black and the red are so bold. So I'm thinking maybe to go white. And I'm going to get this loaded onto the long arm and get it quilted out. I can't wait to see how this quilt design quilts out. Bird's just the best. I am loving this design. I cannot wait. All stitched out. Well, now we're all stitched out and it's time to square up our quilt. I always leave a quarter of an inch from the raw edge of my quilt top when I'm trimming my quilt because I like to do a 1/2 inch seam binding. And then now that I'm working on the point, you can see I've left these squares intact, and I'm going to go ahead and mark where the point is so I can preserve that. I really can't see it very well because of the black, and so I'm going to mark it with some tailor's chalk just so I can see through my ruler. And I'm going to go ahead and use that mark, but I'm going to trim a 1/2 an inch from that mark because that way I have that quarter of an inch when I sew the seam binding on, that the points will be preserved. And then I'll continue around to the other side and we'll go ahead and mark and trim those points off. This worked out really well. However, if you're going to be sending this to a long armor, you might want to trim the points before you send the banner off to a long armor. But it worked well for me to do it this way. Now that I'm all done squaring up the quilt, now it's time for the binding. I've gone ahead and prepared my seam binding, and I am going to attach it to the back side of my quilt because I'm going to do big stitch seam binding treatment on the front. So that'll give me an opportunity to stitch that down on the front. So now it's time to construct our tabs, our hanging tabs. I've gone ahead and pressed a quarter of an inch seam allowance to the wrong side of the fabrics and stitched on both sides of the tab. I folded in half and stitched on both sides. And now I'm turning it inside out and I'm pushing the corners out so that they're nice and crisp. Can be a little bit fiddly. I'm just using a pair of tweezers to do this. You want to be careful that you don't poke your tweezers through the point and fray your fabrics. And then we'll press this out. We'll fold it in half again. And then it'll all line up nicely and we can stitch it to the back of our quilt along the seam binding on the back of the quilt. You'll see here. I did place these tabs 2 inches from each outside edge and then centered the third tab in the center of the quilt. And I will stitch these on after I've stitched down the seam binding. And I think this is going to turn out really well. and the motif adds a really nice design. So the binding is all attached, and I have attached it to the back of the quilt because I am going to big stitch, do a decorative stitch to stitch down the binding to the front of the quilt. I have a little bit of black thread here to help with sewing down these tabs that I created, and they will go on attached to the back of the quilt like so, and we'll whip stitch both of these raw edges, which you saw I have pressed the seam allowances so there are no raw edges that are going to show. And I tried to fussy cut it out so that we had a little bit of a motif going on there. So I'll use that black thread for that. And now it's time to get stitching and get this done. So the Harmony banner is all done. I am so excited about how this turned out. I learned a lot about my pattern test, and I'm going to make some changes to the way I originally designed the pattern to go together before I send it off to the tech editor. And I couldn't be happier that no wavy borders, nice and flat. Love how the block turned out below. And even though this was designed for timeless treasures, I was able to fashion this panel so that I could use it in the design. And it was a little fiddly, but we got there. And the bird motif that I chose, and this quilt design, these quilt designs are from Pear Paws Quilting. I'll put a link down in the caption so that if you want to check out some of her quilting designs, if you have a long arm, she's got some really great things. And so, yeah, so thrilled with how this turned out. If you're new here, thank you. I always appreciate the view. And if you want to leave a note in the caption that you're new, love to engage with you there. And if you're one of my returning followers, thank you for following me to the end here. So I'm going to call this a success. And until next time, happy stitching.